Individuals with social media accounts have probably realized that conservatives lately have been more insufferable than usual because they've been doing a victory lap over the course of the last week in celebration of Brett Kavanaugh being confirmed to the Supreme Court. Now, part of this is them just being excited that his confirmation triggers the libs, because that's really a driving motivator for a lot of people who support right-wing policy and Donald Trump and individuals like Brett Kavanaugh. But another reason they support Brett Kavanaugh isn't necessarily because, they just love his judicial philosophy or think he has the right temperament to be on the Supreme Court. It's because they're going to get something that the right has been wanting for a very, very long time: an overturning of Roe v. Wade. And just sit back and think for a minute. In the event Brett Kavanaugh was that vote that struck down Roe v. Wade, could you imagine how quickly states would act? I think within the first year, there'd be at least a dozen states that outright ban abortion. They're doing what they can to restrict access to safe and legal abortions, and in the event they finally get what they want, I think we're going to see the policy repercussions of that almost immediately. Now, part of the celebration isn't just from your conservative racist uncles, it's from actual lawmakers like Steve King, who tweeted out a picture of an adorable baby with the caption, "Soon, babies like this little angel will be protected in the womb by law." Now, what assumptions do you think are embedded in that tweet? One, obviously, is that abortion is tantamount to baby killing, and two, it's that conservatives care about babies like that. Liberals, we're all cold-hearted, we don't give a shit about babies, we're all for baby killing, we're pro-baby killing. That's essentially what he wants you to believe. That's the moral argument that he's making, and he's using that picture to prime you to think about abortion in a less nuanced way, to get you to believe that any woman who does have abortion has in fact committed an atrocity that is akin to murder. That's exactly what he wants you to think, and it's not just lawmakers like Steve King. Propagandists on Fox News like Ben Shapiro also utilized the same tactic. They tried to get you to believe that abortion is murder by showing you images of fetuses in the womb and showing you that really, abortion isn't so different than actually killing a baby, literally. And part of this is them just trying to prepare the masses for what may be an overturning of Roe v. Wade. So in order to avert some hysteria nationwide, they're trying to get you to think, well, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, it's really not that big of a deal. So we're going to talk about their argument, people like Steve King, but first I want to show you a clip of Ben Shapiro, and what you're going to see here is just pure Republican Party propaganda.
The pro-abortion movement suggests that pro-lifers are extreme. In reality, the extreme position on abortion is held by the Democratic Party. Their platform calls for legal abortion all the way until point of birth. But pro-abortion extremists get away with their rhetoric because they use euphemistic language to describe what exactly abortion is. In fact, the word abortion is itself a euphemism. The procedure of abortion isn't an anodyne polyp removal. It involves doing terminal violence to an unborn child. Ignoring that fact allows abortion advocates to avoid looking reality directly in the face. So, for just a few moments, let's look reality in the face. This is a picture of a 19-week-old baby. This is a human child. This is not a ball of goo. This is not a cluster of cells. In January, 44 Democrats in the United States Senate voted not to protect the rights of babies older than this unborn child. Only 3 Democrats, Joe Manchin, Joe Donnelly, and Bob Casey, voted to protect children at 20 weeks. Only 2 Republicans voted against such protection, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski. Take a good look at that baby. That is a human being with 0 rights, according to the mainstream of the Democratic Party. And human life doesn't begin at 20 weeks. This is a picture of a baby at 12 weeks, barely 3 months. You can see this baby with his hands near his chest. This is not a cluster of cells. This is not a ball of goo. His genitalia have already been formed. His liver and spleen produce red blood cells. This is an unborn human being. Not a single federally elected Democrat would vote for an abortion ban that would protect this baby's life. And life doesn't begin at 14 weeks. This is a picture of an unborn human being at 8 weeks. You can identify the head of this unborn human. You can see where the small buds are forming for arms and legs. But guess what? Life doesn't begin at 8 weeks either. It begins at fertilization, when a new human life is formed, a new human being with its own DNA. This human being is not its mother. It is not its father. It is not a polyp. If we found a human embryo on another planet, the headlines would rightly scream, "Human life found on Mars." Human life is a continuous process of growth from the moment of fertilization onward. Abortion is the killing of this human life. The later the abortion takes place, the more brutal the procedure. But no matter the brutality of the procedure, it is obvious that abortion is not some mere optional surgery to be performed for convenience. And it's even more obvious that those who want to protect the lives of the unborn aren't trying to control women's bodies. Those who cherish abortion are trying to control and dismember the bodies of the unborn. Think about that next time you see a radical feminist in a Handmaid's Tale outfit suggesting that you'd better respect her right to carve apart an unborn baby in the womb, or you're some sort of fascist.
When it comes to propaganda, that has to be very effective, right? Because he doesn't have the facts on his side when it comes to abortion, so what he tries to do is get you to suspend reason and logic and think more about your feelings. He's showing you the picture of the 12-week-old baby, and he's saying, look, this is a baby. Is that really different than an actual born child? Look at the similarities here. This is purely propaganda, and we're going to get through that. But first of all, he just makes up things about what the left believes, and Ben Shapiro strawmans the arguments of the left almost all the time, and he just outright made up something in order to demonize the left and the Democratic Party. He says, quote, that the Democratic Party's platform calls for legal abortion all the way until the point of birth. That's factually incorrect, because when you look at the Democratic Party's platform, it says absolutely nothing about abortion all the way up until the last trimester of a woman's pregnancy. In fact, they don't even specify when they believe it's still morally acceptable for a woman to have an abortion. They don't say 12 weeks, they don't say 24 weeks, and they certainly don't endorse the idea that a woman should be able to get an abortion the day before she is due to give birth. Of course, they don't say that. Ben Shapiro made that up. And if Ben Shapiro heard me make that argument, he'd probably say, well, what about the abortion, or the Democrats, rather, that support late-term abortions? Well, first of all, if a Democrat or any liberal or progressive has indicated support for late-term abortions, begrudgingly so, it was probably because the life of the mother was at stake. So if it comes down to a doctor telling a mother, it's you or the baby, you have to pick, well, that Democrat is doing what a reasonable person would do in saying, I think that obviously the mother should be allowed to make that difficult choice that I couldn't imagine I would make if I were in that situation. So we're simply saying that we want to empower women to make that choice and not say, well, if it comes down to, the woman or the baby's got to survive and the mom's got to die. How can you say that it's reasonable for the government to impose that decision on someone? It's such a difficult decision. How can you say that? Now, I'm not saying that Ben Shapiro is actually making this argument, but certainly he would rebut my claim about that being untrue by saying that politicians like Barack Obama support late-term abortions. And of course, that's just an intellectually disingenuous point to make, because as usual, we're saying that the mother should be empowered to make that really, really difficult decision. Nobody's pro-abortion. Some people might even, surprisingly, be against abortion personally, but still support someone else's right to have an abortion, because they actually do put facts over feelings, unlike Ben Shapiro. But we'll get to that. I want to get to more of his arguments. He continues by saying, pro-abortion extremists get away with their rhetoric because they use euphemistic language to describe what abortion is. Now, first and foremost, think about the language he's using to reframe the debate itself. He's saying that people who support abortion are not pro-choice, they're pro-abortion. And I'm not just arguing based on semantics. Framing really matters, and it's something that Republicans do all the time in order to win over support for their right-wing policies. And what he's doing is he wants you to think people in support of safe and legal abortions are, as he describes it, pro-abortion, pro-baby killing, as they would argue. But let me ask you this, Ben. 57% of Americans support safe and legal abortions. Do you honestly believe that a majority of the country is pro-murder of babies? Do you honestly think that they don't have a nuanced view on this issue? Maybe these people actually support legal abortions because they realize that banning abortion won't necessarily reduce the number of abortions that women have. It would just increase the number of unsafe, illegal abortions that they have. And also, if you really care about reducing the number of abortions, he can use his platform to actually fight the number of abortions that are being had. He could influence lawmakers like Donald Trump to support contraception, expanding access to contraception. But instead, individuals like Ben Shapiro and right-wingers, they don't want to expand access to contraception, which is the one thing that actually would reduce abortions. So I don't even believe that individuals like Steve King or Ben Shapiro are genuinely believing the bullshit they espouse on this, because if they did, they would be doing things, they would be promoting policies that would restrict abortions, or not necessarily restrict abortions, but limit the number of abortions. If you want to stop abortion or limit abortions, you advocate for contraception, but they don't want to do that, which tells you that they're not truly looking to limit the number of abortions. And it's because people like Ben Shapiro, they're propagandists. They have an agenda. And he shows you images of fetuses to tug at your heartstrings. And once he establishes that there's human-like qualities here, he then establishes the precise point where life begins. Once he gets you there, he says life begins at fertilization. And he even makes the point that if we found a human embryo on another planet, headlines would rightly scream human life found on Mars. Now, think of how odd that argument is. Because if we found any life on Mars, we would be over the moon. If we found a flower on Mars, we would all collectively lose our minds. If we found a gnat flying around on Mars, it would be absolutely a huge discovery. But does that mean that that wouldn't stop Ben Shapiro from swatting those motherfuckers away from his face or out of his food on Earth? Of course not. So he's trying to make a value judgment in a really strange and, quite frankly, counterintuitive way. And eventually, he gets to the point in this segment where he just drops all the innuendo and he just outright says what he thinks. He says, abortion is the killing of this human life. The later the abortion takes place, the more brutal the procedure. So if aborting a 12-week-old fetus is brutal, but killing a 20-week-old fetus is even more brutal, then fully developed human beings and children must be the ultimate sin when they're killed for Ben Shapiro, as they not only feel pain, unlike fetuses before 20 weeks, but they're actually aware of their existence and want to live. So I'm assuming that Ben Shapiro cares the most about children and adults, right? Seeing that he has repeatedly referred to himself as someone who's, quote, pro-life. So when you actually accept Ben Shapiro's argument and you take it to the next logical conclusion, you make that jump, then clearly if aborting a fetus is awful, then killing a fully formed adult or child has got to be the worst thing imaginable. It's got to be at the top of Ben Shapiro's priorities. So I take it he speaks out against war all the time, right? If he's pro-life like he claims he is, then he's not going to pick and choose. He's going to be consistently pro-life and speak out in favor of all lives that are lost unnecessarily and arbitrarily, right? Well, let's look at a particular war. Let's just look at Afghanistan, for argument's sake. The number of civilian casualties that resulted directly or indirectly from the Afghanistan war was anywhere between 100,000 and 350,000 lives. Did Ben Shapiro scream at the top of his lungs that this is unacceptable, this is murder? Actually, no. This is what pro-life Ben Shapiro said about the Afghanistan war. Quote, enemy civilian casualties, okay by me, and here's what he says specifically. I'm getting really sick of people who whine about civilian casualties. Maybe I'm a hard-hearted guy, but when I see in the newspapers that civilians in Afghanistan or the West Bank were killed by American or Israeli troops, I don't really care. In fact, I would rather that the good guys use the Air Force to kill the bad guys, even if that means some civilians get killed along the way. One American soldier is worth far more than an Afghan civilian. This is the guy who's trying to convince us that he's pro-life? Ben Shapiro does not give a flying fuck about life. The only reason why he is against abortion is because he knows that this is a wedge issue that consistently keeps evangelicals loyal to the Republican Party, and seeing that he's a Republican Party propagandist, then he's going to really try to hit home the point that abortion is murder. Abortion is murder, and murder is bad. But if murder is bad, then why doesn't he care? He literally said he doesn't care about civilian casualties. In fact, the title of his article says, "Civilian casualties are okay by me." That's the guy who we're supposed to believe cares about life? What did Ben Shapiro say about the bomb that we gave to Saudi Arabia that hit a school bus and killed children in Yemen? What did he say about that? Is that not an abomination to individuals like Steve King or Ben Shapiro? Now look, I know what you're going to say. That article was published in 2002, but it's still up on Town Hall's website. He hasn't taken it down, and he is still writing articles for Town Hall. He writes these opinion pieces, and you'd think that if he moved away from that position and wanted to repudiate that view, that he would delete that article, but it's still up. It's still getting clicks. He doesn't care about life. He's not pro-life. And when you call individuals like Ben Shapiro and Steve King pro-life, then you are buying into their propagandist framing, because people who are pro-war cannot be pro-life. Being pro-war and unapologetically in support of wars like Afghanistan, Iraq, that's antithetical to being pro-life. People like Ben Shapiro and Steve King don't care about life at all. Once life is born, they don't care about giving that life dignity or civil rights or civil liberties. They don't care if that life dies in wars. They don't care. These are not individuals who are pro-life. Calling them pro-life is the biggest joke ever. Now, if you actually are one of the few individuals in the country that is consistent on this issue, and you still are personally, morally against abortion, but you're also equally, if not more, outraged about war, then I feel you. That's fine. I actually can respect that position. There can be disagreement on this issue, and as I stated, people who are pro-choice, some of them actually are morally against abortion, but they actually put facts over feelings, and they know that banning abortion wouldn't necessarily achieve their goal of limiting abortions. Now, earlier this year, I covered the so-called March for Life, where a bunch of right-wing evangelical Republicans supposedly marched for life. And really, this was just an anti-abortion protest. They didn't march to end wars. They marched to stop abortion. And here's what I said about these individuals and why they're so wrong and why they don't have facts on their side. First of all, contrary to popular belief, abortion isn't tantamount to baby killing. Furthermore, the abortion rate in general continues to decline in the United States year after year. But for the few abortions that do occur, over 90% of them happen fewer than 13 weeks into pregnancies, which is the pre-gestation period. And just over 1% of abortions are performed after 21 weeks. Now note that states do not offer abortions to women if they are within the 22 to 24 week period of their pregnancy. Additionally, nearly a fifth of abortions are medically necessary, and on the moral side of things, if you think abortions are immoral because fetuses may have the ability to feel pain, well, the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists found that a fetus can't actually feel pain before 24 weeks, and the University of California found that they actually aren't able to feel pain until 28 weeks. And these are all statistics that are provided by the Guttmacher Institute, and if they're not convincing to you, that's perfectly fine, because if you still are against abortions, if you're morally opposed to abortions, that's fine. But there is one tried and true method that absolutely reduces the number of abortions: contraception. Greater access to contraception not only reduces teen pregnancy, but it also is much more effective at reducing abortion than prohibitive laws. And as The Intercept's Saeed Jalani explains, participants of the March for Life know exactly how to reduce abortions. They can push their government to fund contraception. People who are marching in the so-called March for Life protest, they're not advocating for greater access to contraception. In fact, they're against abortion and contraception. So they want to have it both ways. On one hand, they want to ban abortions, but on the other hand, they also want to ban contraception, which just so happens to be the one thing that actually reduces the number of abortions. Now, I know that instinctively you might be inclined to say, well, there's one thing that can reduce abortions for sure. You just ban it. But that's actually not true. In fact, the abortion rate, generally speaking, in the United States overall was higher before it was legalized. So legalizing abortion actually does decrease the number of abortions. I know that sounds odd, but that's the numbers. That's the statistics that are widely available. So, I think that I've said everything I needed to. Anyone who is supposedly pro-life, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be completely hypocritical and not care at all about war. So the next time you are confronted by someone who's pro-life, who tells you that you should support Brett Kavanaugh voting to overturn Roe v. Wade, possibly, why don't you ask them if they realize that overturning Roe v. Wade won't necessarily do what they think it will do in curtailing the number of abortions? Why don't you ask them why they're not supporting initiatives to expand access to contraception? Why don't you ask them what they thought about Saudi Arabia bombing children with bombs that our military gave them? What do they think about Saudi Arabia committing an actual genocide in Yemen with our approval and support? Ask them what they think about those issues. And if they don't actually speak out and have a lot to say about Yemen or the Iraq or Afghanistan wars or our drone strikes being carried out in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia, they're not pro-life, and we cannot keep calling these people pro-life. Because I've said it once, I'll say it again. You cannot be pro-life if you are simultaneously pro-war, and you can't just even be ambivalent towards the idea of war. If you are truly pro-life, then you better be one of the loudest people in the country speaking out against wars, but seeing that most pro-lifers, quote pro-lifers, mind you, vote for Republicans all the time, and they're currently trying to ramp up tensions between the United States and Iran, which would be a war that would kill millions of people potentially, we all know that they're not truly pro-life.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.